Hello everybody, Tracy Sizemore here. We are on day 26 of RPG a Day. That's August 26th. I'm actually recording this on August 26th. Crazy. I haven't been doing that because I've been recording ahead because I had to go to Gen Con this month. And that takes 5 days out of my recording of RPG a Day. So I am back from Gen Con finally, and had a great time, and ran some games. They went all super well, which was awesome. And I ran on the 50-yard line of Lucas Oil Stadium, which is another check mark I can put in my book of amazing things I've done. Among others are like singing in Carnegie Hall, which I've done, and going to Prague based on the merits of a lighting design I did. Those are all really cool things I've been able to do just because I did things, because I do things, right? Anyway, RPG a Day, day 26. The question of the day is, which RPG has the most useful resources? I think that's what the exact question is. And this is going to send me off on tangents like the questions normally do, so beware. The whole idea is that you get to define resources for yourself, so whatever I feel the best resources are that an RPG provides, I get to decide what that is, whether it's the bling of components or the advice of a GM section, you know. And so I'm going to have a couple choices, as usual, because most, best, you know, whatever. And I'll start with maybe another on-the-nose choice, and this is, I keep bringing this one up because it's really good, even though I don't hardly play it. So the first choice I would make is the D&D 5e Dungeon Master's Guide, as far as RPG which has among the most useful resources. Because its advice to GMs it's really beautiful. And I've mentioned this before in terms of its advice with regard to inclusion, like sort of the best writing, most inspiring kind of thing. This time I'm mentioning it because pure GM advice that can translate across all systems is really beautifully presented and done well in the DM's Guide for D&D 5e. Now, I don't play D&D 5e very much, and I have reasons for that, and I could go on that tangent if you want. The reason I don't is the high fantasy D&D world never really, I mean, it appealed to me way back early on, but I didn't have anybody to play with me. And then I got into superheroes and realized that the high fantasy D&D world was too, I don't know, I want to be careful how I say this, but for me it's a little one-dimensional. Meaning, it's too easy to solve problems by killing things. And it's not necessarily easy to solve problems by killing things, but that seems to be the go-to solution in D&D. We run into somebody that's bad, or we run into a dungeon, and obviously everything in the dungeon must die. Now, of course, people can run it differently, but how many people do? That's the question, right? And to add to that, the culture of D&D now, after, you know, it came out in the 70s and now we're in the 2017s, the culture of D&D has gotten so ingrained in the players who play it and the psyche of people who know D&D or think they know D&D or understand what D&D is all about, that it's very, very difficult to break people out of the murder hobo, we solve our problems by killing kobolds and other baddies mindset. And this is just not something I'm super interested in. So if I'm going to play D&D, I'd either want to run it, you know, or I'd want to play in a game where people are either willing to come at it from a fresh perspective or ignore what they know about D&D. That's hard to do. That's harder than you think. So, that high fantasy world, and I've got other reasons I don't particularly love it. It's so ingrained. It's so elves, dwarves. Elves don't like dwarves. You know, I mean, it's so ingrained in terms of what the world is, how the races interact with each other, and, you know, what the hierarchy of bad foes are, that to me it's lost all its wonder. You know, again, this is not a hard and fast thing. This is just the way the culture has sort of developed around D&D. That's why I don't play D&D very much. And again, even if I ran it, I'd have to find players who are willing to sort of abandon that culture a little bit and look at it from a fresh perspective, because I am not going to be the one who says, you know, the solution to this problem is killing everything in sight. I'm not going to let them do that. And D&D is set up to do that. You know, that's the way it is. Now, 5e is particularly awesome, and this is what's so vexing about the whole thing. Excuse me. 5e is just really, really good in terms of moving in the direction of role-playing and expanding the idea of what D&D is about, and moving away from the tactical combat that was 3, 5, and 4. And I love that about 5e. And I think that 5e would be fun to play. But again, the culture is what stops me. Regardless of all that, and getting back to the question, I think the DM's Guide for D&D 5e is really good in terms of the resource of giving a GM advice on how to run a role-playing game, irrespective or irregardless of the system. So, besides that, it's a beautiful book, and it's nice to have on the shelf. So, that's one answer. Another answer is Apocalypse World. And I'm talking original Apocalypse World. There's lots and lots of games based on the Apocalypse World engine, and that's awesome. I don't, again, just like D&D, I don't tend to play much Apocalypse World. And there's reasons for that. One is that it's, in terms of GMing Apocalypse World, or any kind of derivative thereof, it's a very improvisational style of GMing. It's a very play to find out what happens, and puts a lot of pressure on the GM to figure out how to react to things that happen. That makes it very hard. And it makes it especially hard for me because I'm not a particularly good... Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I don't particularly enjoy being improvisational as a GM. In terms of, you know, oh my gosh, you have a partial hit there, so there's going to be, you know, you kind of get what you want, but there's going to be a complication there, it's going to change the story. Because that's what Apocalypse World games are all about. When you miss, or partially miss, it doesn't just mean you missed. It means that there's going to be some sort of complication or reaction to that miss that will affect the world or affect the situation you are in some way. So it's not just enough that you missed. It has to add something to it. That puts a lot of pressure on the GM, which is why I tend not to want to run Apocalypse World games. However, I like to play in them as long as the GM is, you know, good at what they're doing. Apocalypse World games like Apillion, which I love. I love the whole idea of Apillion, which is dragons, sort of Lord of the Rings meets My Little Pony. It sounds crazy, but it's sort of uplifting, and I kind of like that. And when you're playing with Marissa Kelly, who wrote the game, or you're playing with Mark Diaz-Truman, who is the part owner of Magpie Games, who published the game, it can be great. When you're playing with somebody who has trouble with the Apocalypse World engine and improvisation, it can sort of be painful. However, and this is my whole point, Apocalypse World itself has a fantastic section on GMing. And Apocalypse World is unique in that it has to be run a certain way in order to be Apocalypse World. And D. Vincent Baker gives a very thorough and clear explanation of how to run the game, how to run his game. And it's useful advice that can translate to any other game. And it's all in that book. It's worth reading. And some people are like actively against Apocalypse World type games. And I totally get that. Regardless of that, though, it's worth reading Apocalypse World so that you can have that sort of understanding of what the game is about, and a better sort of understanding of what role-playing is, and a different perspective on how to approach it. Even if you don't agree with it, it's worth reading the Apocalypse World GM section. That is, regardless of what system you normally run in. Because there's stuff there that it sort of breaks it down in a way that's like, oh wow, it's a different way of looking at it. And it sort of breaks it down in a way that us analytical types appreciate, in terms of, here's how role-playing works. Even if you don't agree with it, it's a launching point for discussions that can be very interesting and fruitful. So, Apocalypse World. And finally, number 3, and I'm, being predictable again, is Savage Worlds. Now, the Savage Worlds Deluxe Explorers Edition, that 200-page book that's $10, packs a whole lot of stuff into a little bit of space. There is a short section on GMing in there that it's one of those things that you read it the first time, you go, huh, all right. And then you run some games, and you read it the second time, and you go, huh, all right. And then you run some more games. And then, once you sort of understand what Savage Worlds particularly, what the philosophy of that game is all about, you read it a third time, and you go, oh, this is what I've been doing wrong the whole time. It's short, as everything in Savage Worlds is. They keep it brief. But their advice to GMs is probably the most economical and efficient advice to a GM I've ever read. Because it boils it down to a really simple concept. And this is true for every game. Every game. As a GM and as a world creator, as somebody who is trying to create a setting and adventure for players to play in, for characters to play in, the first and foremost and most important question that GM can ask themselves, and by the way, probably the most difficult question to answer, is what will the characters do in the setting? So you can create a setting all you want. You can create a world and say, okay, well, there's magic here, and there's religion here, and there's this town over here, and this happens, and these characters exist, and all this stuff. But the main and most important question is, once you place these PCs in that world, what do they do? And that could be, they save the world from drowning, as in 50 Fathoms. Or, that's their main goal. Meanwhile, they're being either pirates or privateers, they're sailing on the seas, they're exploring different places and learning about how to save the world from drowning. So I can't like come up with like 100 examples of Savage Worlds settings and what they're all about, but Necessary Evil Breakout, for example, what do the PCs do? They've been dropped inside a cordoned off New York area. They can't get out. They can't get out. And it's sort of an experiment where, there's all kinds of gangs inside, super villain gangs or super gangs. It doesn't, villain is sort of a in Necessary Evil. But what do? Well, trying to get out. They're trying to get out. They're trying to find a way to get out. Meanwhile, they've got to deal with the politics of different gangs, of different groups, and trying to sow cooperation or bully people into giving them what they want so that they can get out. That is what they will do in New York, in this prison that they've been dropped into. And that's, when you're creating a world from scratch, when you're creating something of your own, it is so easy to create the world and not think about how the PCs will interact with the world. And one of the things that Savage Worlds does better than most is to create settings and create worlds where there is a clear definition of what the characters, the PCs, are going to do in that world and how they're going to eventually affect that world. So, I find that little section in Savage Worlds Deluxe Explorers Edition is worth a read every now and then, because it reminds you the hard questions that you must answer as an adventure designer and as a setting designer in order to create a role-playing game rather than just a story in which people sort of try to do things. And I could go on, but I won't, because I don't think I expressed it very well. But those are 3 games that I think have great resources, especially for GMs. There's other games that have other resources for other reasons, for other purposes, and that's awesome. But I don't know, that's what I thought of today. So I could do another one, but I don't know. Probably this is good enough. Okay. I will talk to you tomorrow for day 27. Okay?